Hi, thanks for stopping by my channel where we ask the question, what's that all about? So I named this episode The Skies Are Alive because the last couple of weeks, as most of you probably know, it's been pretty busy out there up in the skies. So I'm going to dive right into it. There's a lot to get to. Forgive me, I'm going to be looking at a lot of my notes because there's just a lot of details that I don't want to miss and I don't want to misquote anyone. So bear with me. I want to dive right into the Chinese spy balloon that was shot down, recovered, identified, and confirmed. Right. So that one's sort of separate. I think of it as separate from the other three. I have a fourth to share, but I keep it separate because it doesn't have any issues with what it was. Right. There's no question about it. It was confirmed. So moving on to February 9th, when the first sighting of the next UAP came up over Alaska in Dead Horse, Alaska. And by the 10th, it was shot down. Then the next one after that was in the Yukon territories. Now, both of those were shot down by F-22s from NORAD, launched from Cheyenne Mountain, actually, which we covered last week. The next one was on the 12th, and that was in Michigan over Lake Huron. Now, that one was shot down by an F-16, not from NORAD. But it's interesting to note that the two F-22s that shot down the objects in Alaska and in Canada were the first time that NORAD in its 65-year history has launched planes, objects over the North American territories. So that's, sort of a big deal. Now, I came across another sighting that was reported on Twitter. I know Twitter, it's kind of like the bane of existence, but it has a lot of useful information. And there's some people on there, researchers, scientists that, post things that are of serious quality and awareness. So I have this sighting that I came across, and Carl Crusher is the name of the individual who has the Twitter account that was informed of this. Now, it was reported that a sighting was seen near Area 51 in Nevada and also a couple miles away from Mount Wilson Ranch. Now, Mount Wilson Ranch, it's interesting to note, used to be owned by Bob Bigelow, who, if you don't know that name, you may recognize it more and associate him more with Skinwalker Ranch, which now neither one of them are owned by him now, but he bought this ranch and Skinwalker primarily because of the rumored activity that goes on at these locations. Now, I'm going to stick with just the Mount Wilson Ranch because it's said that it's got paranormal activity and sightings of ancient Indian spirits, and also there's claims that there's a UFO signals underground in this location, but it's just of note. It's just interesting that this object was, reported close to this. But again, when the witnesses were asked to describe it, they did say it was white and round, which, that does sound an awful lot like what you saw with the Chinese spy balloon, but it was a lot smaller. Now, what they reported seeing was one F-18 and a low-flying large AC-130. I'm not very familiar with, the AC-130. I'm not really familiar with any military aircraft, but those were what they reported seeing. But interestingly, there were no shots fired. What they claimed to have seen that was shot at this object was something like a blue streak that almost looked like a prism. And then this object popped, which again, another reference to maybe a balloon. It was popped and then like vaporized in the air. They said that all they saw was like a one like streamer thing coming from it, which is, to me, it's just so very odd. But, it's interesting to note these sightings because the blue streak, I had heard something about this before, something with a project, a government project. And lo and behold, I was right. So I dug a little deeper. And in my research, I stumbled across an interview, and this was on Twitter also. And it's okay. Get ready for this. This is pretty intense. The man who was doing the interview, his name's Robert Duncan. Now, he has been kind of underground for a while, but he's recently emerged, perhaps in an effort to debunk a lot of what people were seeing, or to apply an explanation to what could be seen by pilots, naval pilots and such, Air Force, that kind of thing. But he's a scientist at DARPA. And DARPA is, and I want to get it so exactly right, DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And he claims that there's a military group. Now, it's rumored to be the Navy working on this particular project, but it's not confirmed. So I want to make sure I make that clear. He's working on something called Project Bluebeam, right? Now, it's okay. So back in the 80s, I'm going to hop back a little bit. Ronald Reagan made a speech at the UN and asked the entire congregation there, what if humankind had one joint adversary from the skies above, from an outside alien force that all of humanity had to fight against together and to unify together to fight it? So in that same vein, this project has been described this way by Robert Duncan. They're essentially tricking our pilots using something he referred to it as comparatively to like a laser that you use to entertain a cat. Okay, that's the level of precision it has, and that's the level of how real it is to the cat. It's that real to the pilots that are being sent out to investigate what they're seeing. I'm going to describe it to you. This is how Robert Duncan described the project. Okay, this intersecting beams into the atmosphere, they send these in to excite the electron orbitals of the oxygen and nitrogen in the atmosphere, and that creates a glow, which ionizes the air, which creates something that shows up on radar, which of course would send our fighters out to investigate, right? The theory is that they can make it appear in three-dimensional space, they can make it appear that there's basically an alien fleet about ready to attack, and then just as soon as they appear, they can make them disappear. Just turn it off. Now, the trick is, they call it a trick. Now, if our pilots can fall for it, then our enemies would fall for it. That's the logic they're using, which to me seems horrifyingly dangerous. These are our well-trained Top Gun naval pilots, Air Force pilots. I mean, our military being used sort of as guinea pigs. And it just seems like a very dangerous game to be playing at this time, right? But essentially, that's what our government is doing. Now, like I said, it's not confirmed which group is doing it. It is suspected to be the Navy. Take it for what it's worth. Now, I feel like anyone can make a claim at this time. I feel like we're vulnerable to hearing things like this. And unless I see some more evidence and some documentation around it, I just sort of roll my eyes and go, yeah, of course that's what's happening. But it would, if it was true, if it was proven to be true, this creation of these beams, this glow that appear like alien ships, could explain a lot of what pilots are seeing, and it could be part of this project, which is just horrible to think about. I mean, the narratives that are coming out from the White House and the Pentagon, because they're kind of they're not in agreement about how to communicate with the media, who then communicates with us, right? Lou Elizondo, I'm not sure if that name is familiar to you, but he is well known in the UAP investigative world. He used to be in charge of ATIP, which was the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And that was a Pentagon budgeted project that he headed up till 2012. He quit because he thought the government should be more transparent about what was actually happening in the skies. Because that group did the more recent version of that today, it's AARO, which is the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, and that's also a Pentagon group. But what is working in contrast to that is, after watching the press conference from Biden, which I was not impressed with because it gave us no new information, he spoke of an interagency team to put together to study UAPs, their origins, and these things. Thing is, that's already in place. That's AARO. And so you've got AARO working for the Pentagon. You've got this interagency group that Biden wants to start up through the White House. And then you have NASA too on the side coming in and also wanting to claim some responsibility to identify these objects that are up in the air. That you've got three cooks in the kitchen, all making different things, and you don't know at the end of the day if it's going to make a meal or just a mess. It feels like a mess. And I'm the American public, right? So Senator Marco Rubio has been very vocal when it comes to why all these different agencies are being brought in when AARO is specifically supposed to be leading the charge on this. And he's quoted, he's very frustrated because, and he's a ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. I don't want to misquote him. So he came out of a briefing and where they were discussing, obviously, the current UAP situation over the last couple of weeks. His quote was this: 99% of what was discussed in that room can be made public without compromising the security of our country. When asked when the public would be told, Rubio said, "My timeline is immediate. We have to know what we're talking about, but I do think that when you shoot things down over the airspace of this country for the first time in the United States 65-year history of NORAD, you owe the American people more than some hurriedly called press conference in the middle of a Super Bowl." Now, I'm not going to claim to get he's not one of my favorites. He's definitely not one of my favorite people. I completely agree with him. He's making perfect sense. And, Senator Blumenthal goes on to say, the American people should be given more information. They're ready for it, they can handle it, and they need and deserve to know it. Whether it's the president, personally, he can't go on national television every evening. Why not? He's the president. There used to be a president he used to go on TV all the time. But the Congress has an obligation as well to inform the American people. And then I also have, interesting quotes from Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader. How did we get into a position where the greatest nation in the world doesn't know what is traversing in our own airspace? The commander-in-chief owes the country some answers. You've got the Homeland Security Advisor to the governors across the country. It's true that there are things that are being identified that don't resemble anything else. And it turns out there are hundreds, if not thousands of them. So, like I said before, we're finally getting people to talk about it, that, these people are the higher ups, they're the government that, need to be paying attention. But the frustrating thing is that, and Lou Elizondo, I want to go back to him because he's coming out and he's talking about things that he's found. For example, the NSA came back. He did not have the date of this exact time when this happened, but he is bringing to light something that the NSA, the National Security Agency, wrote a report about. And it was re-released by The Sun. And he was on Fade to Black podcast, and he's quoted as saying this: "The NSA warns aliens could contact humans through high frequency signals. As experts warn, we are not alone in the universe." He goes on to say that if the United States government wasn't looking into UFOs, then why would the NSA write a report titled Communication with Extraterrestrial Intelligence? You know, it's tough to stay. It's important to know that the media has been, feeding the public, and they're almost preparing them for disappointment. They're being fed by senior defense sources, and all these characteristics that they're spewing seem to be, making up a case for a cover up. So it's almost like Balloongate, Roswell. Let's go back to 1947. It's like for one step forward, we're taking several years back, and it's so frustrating. And the media, it's funny because they downplay and discredit and ridicule legitimate scientists, researchers, and ufologists in their reporting. It's like they're deliberately subverting the truth. And, it's almost like they have to. It's something that they're required to do, which makes no sense. It makes no sense. And I want to, Jeremy Corbell, who has a great podcast with George Knapp called Weaponized, was quoted saying that the stigma is what causes, as far as he can tell, a lot of the lack of journalism and pre-bunking that is known, that is done in the alien phenomenon. UFO phenomenon. But even with our mechanisms of government, it's really the stigma. Like, we don't want to admit what we see right in front of our faces, because then it's like cat's out of the bag. And he speaks about Susan Go from the Pentagon, who does the press releases for the Pentagon, and it seems like she's just doing the same thing, muddying waters and confusing the public. The messaging is circular. It's not moving forward. The latest updates I have that I'll share with you, Chris Mellon, who is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, he's remarkably astute and serious about UAP research. He quoted in his Twitter feed that the congressional record, there's a Senate resolution now, Senate Resolution 66, and it goes in part, whereas the substantial increase in the detection of unidentified aerial phenomenon since February 4th, 2023, warrants further investigation and attention to domain awareness gaps identified by U.S. Northern Command, NORAD. NORAD's radar was only expanded to a certain level. Now they have opened up their radar, and UAP reports are abound, right? But, you get James Rosen, who's in the press. He's a White House correspondent. He asked John Kirby, who's the assistant to Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs. He's the one who's been doing a lot of the press conferences. And he was asked about the videos from the fighter jets cockpits. If in fact these things are all benign, these other ones that they're calling all benign Balloongate, they're not even going to try to recover them. Actually, the New York Times on the 18th, just last week, said U.S. calls off search for unidentified objects shot down. So that's that. We're never going to know. But he said that he'd have to refer this reporter to DOD, Department of Defense, in terms of releasing imagery. Why? If there's nothing to see, if there's nothing anomalous about these objects, just let us see them. It's just, it's interesting. But the fact of the matter is there's no classification on unidentified tech or craft. The full footage of these incidents should be able to be released to the public immediately. So it's very frustrating. It's again good that UAPs are being spoken about more mainstream, but it's very frustrating that they're not being taken as seriously as they should be still. But if more updates come in, I will certainly share them with you. Thanks for tuning in. I know it's been another long video, but it's been a really long couple of weeks. So I hope you're staying happy and healthy, and stay weird. stay weird. There it is. And take care. Thanks.